Okay guys, it's Justice again here from tutorialscamp.com. So let's talk about object reference variables. In the last video I'll show you the meaning of primitive variables and then the concept behind it, right? So what I want to show you today is what is meant by object reference variable, right? So in Java, right, when Java come with its own data types, like those primitive data types that I talked about in the last video, like int and boolean and then long, double, those stuff, right? Those are primitive data type. But imagine what if we have our own class and then we want to create an object of it, right? We want to reference it so that we can point to the members and then methods of it so that use it in our application, right? That's where object reference variables come in. So what I mean is this: open my Eclipse and let me show you, right? Let me increase it so that you guys can see. You see, we have this class here, right? And I've already told you about class. I already said that a class is a blueprint of an object. So we have this class here, right? But let's say we want to create a variable that can help us to access the number these guys here in our application later on, right? So what we normally do is to create an object of it, right? And that object will be stored in our application memory when we execute our application. But the address to that object that will be saved in our application memory when we execute it. That's what is done by object reference variable, right? So look at object reference variables as like variables that you the programmer define yourself, which have a data type of a class or interface that you the programmer has created. So it's not a variable that has an data type of primitive data type like integer. This guy here is a primitive variable. Okay, this guy here, see, it's come with Java 8 on data types, right? But let's say we have a class here and then we want to create a variable of it, right? That's where we object reference variables come in place, right? So what you will normally do is that we have this our book class here, right? So what you do is that you create a book class here, right? And then we create a variable of it. Okay, create a variable of it. Now when the variable is done, we use the new keyword to create an object of it. Okay, this object, when we run our application, it will be stored in our application memory, right? So a skeleton of this class will represent this object that will be saved in our application memory when we run the application. So this object reference variable here, right, that's what this will point to the address of this object that is what's being saved in your application memory, right? When you run the application, you can't actually see this object with your eyes, right? It's something that is saved in your application memory. But if you want to point to it, this is the address or the pointer that we use to point to it, right? So this guy here will be saved in our application memory and it will contain this guy here, right? All this block of code here will be converted into bytecode and then saved into our application memory. So now when we create another object of this class here, right, we can do something like book and then my book object reference variable 2. Okay, equal to, use the new keyword to assign the object to this guy. Now what you have done is that you have created two objects of this single class here. So when we run our application, right, we are going to have two skeletons of this guy in our application, right? So our application will contain containers, right? It will be something like this. Okay, and let me duplicate it. Let me make this one green. Okay, so inside our application, because you have created two objects of what, of this guy here, of this class here, right? This containers will be the object of this class, that will be stored in what, in our application memory. So these containers, you can't see them, right? Let me point to it so that you guys can see. This guy here represents this guy, the address of what, of this guy. That's too big. That's too big. Let me make it 20, and then you can see it. Okay, but this is not the memory right here. This is the address that will point what, the class of this guy. So understand it like that. And then you will have this guy here, the object 2. Okay, I guess you guys can see. Let me duplicate this guy one more time, and then point it here. Alright, cool. So now you see this class here, right? Because you have created two objects of it, this class here you have created, when we run our application, it will create the first object of the class and store it in our application memory, and then it will create the second object of the class stored in our application memory. So this guy here, it represents this class right here. Okay, it represents this class. Let me put in the text so that, oh, that's bad. See if I can. I want to make the text too small so that you guys can see. Okay, that's cool. Extend this one so that it will be big. And then duplicate this guy. Oh, okay, this should be cool, rather. And then let's change the color of this guy here. I think it's even okay, right? So this class here, right, we have created two objects of it. This is the first one, which represent this one. This one will be stored in our application memory, and this one is the second one, represents the object of this guy, right? So inside, when we run our application, inside it we have gotten what, two objects of it, right? And those two objects, right, these guys are the what, the pointer to what, those objects in our what, our application. So you won't actually see this object, right? This object, where is it? This object, it is in our application memory, so you won't be able to see the classes and then the name properties of it. So if you want to point to object 1, right, the first object, and then access this name property, you use the what, this pointer address here to what, access it. And if you want to access the second object, to use this address pointer to what, to access it, right? So these guys are what are called what, object reference variables, right? They are not objects themselves. These guys are the what, the real object, but these guys are what, the variables that help us to what, access the properties and then the methods in this what object, right? That's why we call them, we call these guys, these two guys, object reference what variables. And these are the what the objects, these are the rare object. Okay, yeah. So what you should know is that with one class, right, you can create any number of objects of it that you want, right, in your application. But beware of garbage collection. If you create so many objects of it and then some of it are not of use, it's going to increase the memory of your application, and it's going to reduce the performance of it, right? So you need to be aware of that. So that's the catch behind it, right? So that's the catch behind it. So these guys, this guy and this guy, they are object reference variables. They are not objects themselves, right? These are the objects. But these guys, when your application, you by what is inside these guys here, right? You can't see what is inside the properties and the methods that's inside this guy, right? But those are what is here, like the properties and whatever it will be is in this guy is whatever is here, right? But you can't actually see it. So if you want to point to it, you just use the address and point to this class, right? Because when your application run, the skeleton of this guy what will be the what will be created to represent what this object here, right? That's why we call a class what a blueprint of what an object, right? So this class represents what exactly one of this guy, and it represents exactly what this guy, right? So you should know the difference. But this is a class and this is what an object, and this is what object reference variable. Okay, so know the difference, right? So now let's say if we want to point to this guy here, how can we actually access it? What we can do is that let's print the book name here and see what will happen. So what we can do is to say system.out.println and then use my object book, the first object of it, right? And then we use the dot notation, the dot operator, to point to any one of these guide members here. Okay, so use like hey, so the pointers are actually say that hey, point to this book name here or whatever property that you try to decide here, right? So you can see that immediately I enter the pointer, it is suggesting me what of some of the properties that belongs to what this class here, right? And I've gotten book name right here. You just enter it and you're good to go, right? So if I execute it, yeah, I'm going to get PHP here. Okay, so let me run it and you can see. Alright, you can see I've gotten PHP here, which represent what this book value here, right? So that's how object reference variables are, right? So what you should know is that these guys, they are not object themselves, right? They are pointed to what this object here, and this guy too is a pointer to what this object here, and this guy here is not an object, it is a class, right? Now if you want to prove why this guy is a pointer to this object here, just print it out and you'll see the address of what this object in your what application, because each object that you will create in your application, it has its own different address. So look at the first, let's print the first address of what this object here, and you will see that when we print the second one too, we are going to get different ones. All right, so okay, let me print them both and you will see that they are not the same. And then this one, right? So this object too, when I run it, you should get the address of what these two objects, right? And you will notice that they are not the same, right? So run it, you can see, right? This represents my application, and then this represents the book object, the first one. Look at the address of it, the first object, right? 3FE733D, right? And this represents the second object. Look at the address of it at 5ACF9, blah blah blah. You see, so the address is not the same. Okay, so that's our object reference variables, right? So this represents a separate object of this class in the application memory, and this also represents a separate member object of this class in your application memory. Okay, so if you can do something like this, you can use object to set value for the properties in your application, right? So now you can do something like you can change the object of this guy here to, you want to change the first property of this guy, right? Dot book name, right? And then change the book name to Java. Okay, and then system.out book name, right? And then dot book name, right? Let's change this guy to the second object. Oh, sorry. This guy need to be here rather. And then let's change the second book to how do you call it? What's JavaScript? Okay. Now what have I done here, right? So this represents the first object of this class, right? So each object represents a different object of this class in the application memory, right? So I'm changing the first object here, the property of the first object, the book property of the first object of this class to Java. Okay, and the second object here to write the book property of it, the book name property of it, I'm changing it to JavaScript, right? So if you run this guy, you should get you should print out first object, the book name of it, we should get Java, and the second one we should get JavaScript, right? Exactly. So let me run it and you should see. You see, gotten JavaScript and PHP, right? So why is it that when we printed it out, right, I didn't get the same Java, they didn't all print out Java, or they didn't print out JavaScript, but they printed different values, right? That means that each object here represents a different object of this class here, right? Once you have created a single object of this class here, right, it is saved in your application memory with different address. And once you created another object of the same class, it will be saved in your application with different address. So when you use this address of it to access the properties in this object, Java treats it as if you are accessing the object of this guy, not this guy. Okay, so when you use the second address of this guy to access this object, the properties in this object, Java treats it as if you are accessing the properties in this object, not this object. Okay, because the address of this object is this, and the address of this guy here is this, right? So know the difference very much, right? So know the difference very well. Okay, yeah. So that's exactly the catch behind object reference variables. So know the difference that if you have your own object class and then interfaces, you can create a variable of it and then access its members. The variables that have a data type of your own class and then interfaces, that's what we call them object reference variable, right? And what you should also know is that you can't see object with your own eyes, right? when you run application, the properties in this guy here represent what this guy here, but the properties, this book name here property, what you actually can't see it because it will be saved in the what the application what when we run it. Okay, so all the code that is inside this application, this guy here is just a skeleton of this guy here, but this guy is the code inside it. You can't see it. Okay, it only what get compiled when we run what our application, and we use our application this address guy here to access that memory location. Okay, so that's what you should know. It's very easy, right? Java is very easy. Just look at this, right? In JavaScript, you although there's object in it, right, and you can also access it, the same thing as Java 2. You can create your own class and then create variables of it, and then what access the properties and then methods in it, right? I didn't talk about method. Now if you create a method like strange, in Java everything is a data type, so everything make sure you use what a data type. Okay, strange, and then come in. I need to give this method a name. Get book name. Get book name. Okay, so let's do something. System dot out dot print line, okay. Oh, damn, right. Sorry, sometimes that's it. When you learn a lot of programming languages, you end up confusing procedural programming languages with object-oriented programming language, right? So that's how you define methods in Java. I think I've even shown you guys how you do it, right? So they represent the name of the method, and then we are just printing this guy here, right? So inside the object, if you want to point to a method here, you just use the dot notation just as it printed out to the members here, right? So we just bring this guy here and then use this guy, but don't forget the parentheses. This is a method. Okay, so the same thing, and bring this guy, the second object, and this one, get rid of this and print it out. So we should get the book name and this everything, right? So it's going to print out, it's going to print Java and then JavaScript. I guess that's what I'll get. There we go. Java, JavaScript, and then PHP. Why do we get and then PHP? Okay, sorry. This should be 2 here, right? This should be 2, and then run it. There we go. JavaScript, right? So that's how what is meant by object reference variables, and the whole concept behind it, right? It just gives you the opportunity to create your own object of a class, and then point to the properties and then methods in it, and then use it in your application. It's really easy, and you should understand. Alright guys, thank you for watching, and if you are new here, please subscribe to the channel to be the first person to see all the upcoming videos. And if you like the video, let me know in the comment section video, right? Thank you, and then see you in the next video. Have a good day.